The thing about it is that 94% of US adults have some element of mitochondrial dysfunction, which is they can't either make energy well or they can't actually detox from the energy that they make. Meaning that when we make energy, which is ATP in our cells, we also make what are called quote unquote waste products of energy, which are reactive oxygen species. And you have to have antioxidants in the body to help manage those. And if you're antioxidant deficient, if you have gut inflammation, brain inflammation, you're going to be deficient in antioxidants. And so what Methylene Blue can come in and do is support all aspects of mitochondrial function, both the energy side and the detox side. And it can do it very quickly.
Well, welcome to Biohacking with Brittany, the podcast where science meets wisdom. I'm Brittany Ford, holistic nutritionist, biohacker, and mom. And for years, I struggled with gut issues, hormonal imbalances, and the exhaustion of motherhood while running a business. Biohacking and functional medicine became my way back to clarity, vitality, and trust in my body. And that's why I'm here, not just to share information, but to share the practices and perspectives that truly shifted my health and my life. Each week, I bring you science-backed tools, honest conversations, and rituals I live myself so you can return to your own body's wisdom and create longevity on your own terms. Because your body already knows this is just the space to remember. Hello, and welcome back to the show. I am so excited you are listening. Today, I got to sit down with Dr. Scott Sherr. And what was really nice about this episode is actually we got to talk a lot about him as a parent and as a dad. So he has 4 children. And after our recording, he said to me, it was so nice to actually talk about being a dad with you and what that looks like, because I don't really get to talk about that a lot. And so we talk about how to show up as a present father or parent, how to have the energy for 4 children on top of a career. And we really got to go into all of those details for the parents out there who have multiple kids or the new parents. Like, there was really so much we got to really share in this space. He is a board certified internal medicine physician. He's certified to practice health optimization medicine and hyperbaric oxygen therapy. And so we also got into that. We also spoke about methylene blue, and this is something I haven't talked about on my show in quite a long time. Not something I dabble with right now, especially because I'm still breastfeeding. So I'm kind of like holding off a little bit on some of these things until I'm done. And we talk about how he uses it in his practice with clients, why he recommends it, how it works. We really get into all of the different specifics on methylene blue. He is just such a wealth of knowledge, and I just really appreciate being able to talk to him. We talk about the nervous system and, like I said, energy and sleep and these cornerstone healthy habits. And I think this is an episode where everyone listening will be able to take away something truly, truly. Enjoy this podcast episode. Before I dive in, a shout out to Bioptimizers. They are a staple in my pantry. I love their magnesium, digestive enzymes, and probiotics. You guys know that. You can use my discount code BiohackingBrittany and it will save you 15%. And I strongly recommend it. I don't know how, to be honest, like, they're so important. They're supplements. Like, I don't know what my base of supplements would be without Bioptimizers. And that's saying something. And I don't think there's another brand that I actually would say that about. Like, I've been using Bioptimizers for 3 years. 3 years, a very long time. So check them out. Digestive enzymes, I take them whenever I eat anything with gluten or lactose or a really big meal. I take their probiotic daily, and I take their magnesium every single night to help me sleep, because I need it as a parent, as we talk about in this episode. So I love them. And a shout out to my retreat. You know what's so funny is, like, I get these DMs from these women about my retreat, and they're like, I keep thinking about your retreat, and it keeps coming back in my mind, and I don't know why. And I think that's such an interesting thing. And I don't know why I find it interesting. I guess because I've been in that position where I have this idea or there's something that I want, and it kind of just always like circles back every day, until you make the decision to get it. And I think it's a sign from the universe or source or whatever you believe in that there's a reason that you're being drawn to this retreat, and there's something waiting for you there. And I actually don't know what that is. I'm not the one to give you answers. I'm just the one to hold space and be with you when you find the answers there. So there's something in Costa Rica waiting for you. And for those women who are messaging me that, like, I keep thinking about it, keeps coming up again and again. There is something waiting for you in Costa Rica to reveal itself that has been waiting for you for a long time. And that's why you're drawn to it. And that's what's pulling you in. My personal, what I would do is I would follow that. And I've followed that previously. So even in November, I'm going to Florida for a retreat because I felt this pull. I was like, oh, there's this thing happening. I need to be in the Florida Keys. I'm going to go and spend time away from my family and come back with whatever downloads and information and reset that I'm looking for. And I can feel it bubbling even now. Like I'm a couple weeks out or a few weeks out. I can feel the transformation like already started and bubbling there and ready for me. So if you're listening to this, I think it's your sign. Trust that intuition, that little voice. Enjoy this podcast episode. I will catch you soon for another one. Welcome back to the show, everybody. I am thrilled to be sitting down with Dr. Scott Sherr, and he is an expert in health optimization, which is so cool. And we're going to talk about how you kind of weave that into your practice. And we're going to talk about mitochondria, energy, parenting, and methylene blue, which I still get questions about in my DMs on Instagram today. So, Dr. Scott, welcome to the show.
It's great to be with you, Brittany. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So before we hopped on the mic, you were talking about the fact that you have 4 kids.
This is true.
I have 1 kid. So my question to you is, how do you do it with 4?
Well, I have to say that I think it's easier to have multiple children rather than just one in general, because if you just have one, you tend to be the playmate of that one child because the child has nobody else to play with. Now, this doesn't exactly correlate to having younger children. So when you have super young kids, they still need a lot of your attention. However, once you're no longer on suicide watch, which is around age 4 to 5, when they actually can like look at something and say, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that, depending on the kid, then it's like, well, you don't need to be their playmate if they have, at least not all the time, if they have a sibling to play with. So, and I think people know what I mean by suicide watch. It's like, your kids are going to do whatever they're going to do. They're going to walk over, they're going to do, you have no idea, right? So if you go to a playground, you have to go on the playground with them and all this kind of stuff. And once you get to like a certain age, it's like, okay, now you can just like sit and watch them play. But if it's the only kid that you have, then you have to still kind of like, be on the playground and do all this stuff. So I find especially when my kids were between like 4 and 12, especially, I would just not see them for hours and hours upon the day. Now, it doesn't mean that it's not easy. It's not like there's a lot of different difficulties of having older kids as well. But in general, I think having 2 or 3 is probably easier than having 1. That would be my short story.
Yeah. What is the age difference between your kids?
So I have a 14, 13, 10, and 8-year-olds. I have 3 girls and my youngest is a boy. We did not plan it that way, but that's just how it happened. So I think the odds of having a 4th kid of a different sex after having 3 of the same is extremely low.
Really?
No, yeah, actually, it's really, so if you already had 3 girls like we did, the odds you have a 4th girl are extremely high compared to having a boy for whatever reason. Just, food for thought for those of you that are looking for the boy after kid 3 or kid 2. It's unlikely as it goes, interestingly enough.
Wow. I did not know that was even a thing. I just thought your odds would be the same no matter what when you're going.
No, interestingly, I think it's like some guys just have more, more sperm of the X, that are going to be female. Some are going to be more of the Y. And so it's like, it's interesting that that's just how it goes. I don't know if there's any correlations to this or not, but that's just something to be aware of as a parent. If you're looking for, that other sex child, if you've already had 3 or 4, the odds are you're not going to have the opposite sex.
Wow. That's good to know. How do you, I guess, like just thinking about having 4 kids and like their age difference here, how do you show up as like present dad, but also you're doing so many things in your career and your business right now? Like, how do you kind of manage both?
Yeah, I mean, you have to have a partner that really, you guys are on the same page, right? Because if you don't, then it's really difficult. It is really difficult if you don't have somebody. I mean, we couldn't do this without a lot of help, right? My wife also works full time, but she works from home. I work from home mostly now. I worked in the hospital for many years as an internal medicine hospital doc. So I think what we've really been trying to always emphasize is that the time that we have with our kids is the time that we have with our kids. So it's really trying to be, present at those times, and then really trying to focus on our work when we're not, with the kids. At this point, it's much easier because everybody's in school. So we have everybody gone from, 8 to 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock. So at least we have blocks of time now. When you're young, when you have young kids, it's much more difficult if you don't have childcare, because then you have to sort of manage, but you also have to manage your energy well, and you have to take care of yourself. I think that's the big thing to remember, is that you can't be the best parent that you can be if you're not also taking care of yourself. You can get away with it for a while, especially if you're young, and especially if you're having kids when you're younger. But the lack of sleep, the stress, the crying, the diapers, everything, it's really, really stressful. And so it was actually the biggest shift in my life was having my first child, because the kid didn't stop crying until she was 6 months old. And this is when I was around 30 years old. And you guys can do the math of how old I am probably now, since I said how old my first child was. But at that point, I thought I had control of my life. I thought I had, everything under control. But you realize very quickly when you have a child that does not listen to you saying to stop crying, because they don't have a way of listening to you, right? That you have much less control than you thought of almost everything. And then once you sort of like lose that sort of drive to have everything under control, like I'm a very type A kind of person, then you realize, well, maybe you have less control of things than you realize. And then you have to also go to the next step. Well, maybe if I don't have control of it, can I really stress about it? And you go, well, if you can't really stress about it, then what can you do to learn how to respond better? So as a human, I've become much better one of those, I think, because of having children and realizing if they scream in your face, it's your response or reaction. It has nothing to do with them. Unless it's like dangerous or like they're going, something is extremely serious. But for the most part, they're yelling because of something that is going on with them that has nothing to do with you. And so you have to start learning this as parents, that your reaction is your own. So if they yell at you and you yell back, that's not on them, it's on you. And you have to think about what caused you to yell in the first place. Were you tired? Were you hungry? What was it? And so this is difficult for new parents, 100%. It was difficult for me, I remember, but this actually was my evolution into really the world of health optimization in my own world and how I could take care of myself better. I started doing fasting. I got an infrared sauna for my house when we knew we were going to have a fourth kid, because I was like, holy crap, in my house in California at the time, there's only 3 bedrooms and 1 bath. Where am I going to go? Right. So was my biggest purchase outside of a house was my infrared sauna, which I still have now here with me in Colorado. So I started really taking care of myself, and my wife, the same thing, right? We knew that we really had to focus on taking care of our own health if we were going to really take care of our kids and be the best parents we could be.
Yeah, I love that. And I definitely stand by that as well. But at the same time, I know it's so difficult for some parents out there. And I've seen videos on socials of like, moms who have to put their kids into daycare because they have to go to work, and maybe they're a single parent, and their video is like, I'm lucky if I get a 5-minute shower. Right. And it's like a video of them getting ready, and it's literally like them brushing their teeth and walking out the door, and that's all they can do. And so how do you explain to somebody in that position of like, this is not sustainable and it's actually impacting your health long term? Like there's going to be negative effects from this. Just like you said, like all of the stress, the lack of sleep, the lack of adequate nutrition. What can you even recommend to somebody who's in that position?
Yeah, you make a really good point, and it's not easy, completely 100%. I may have said it like it was easy, but this has been an evolution for me. And I've been very lucky to have a supportive partner this whole time. Mm-hmm. And I do understand that socioeconomic class and, marital status and relationships. And so I think what it comes down to is that people, even and I've seen this, a lot of times, is that even people that don't think they have a lot of time have more time than they realize if they just start being more intentional about it. So for example, these things are phones, right? How much time do you spend on your phone every day? Could you spend, 10 minutes less and take a slightly longer shower? I bet you probably could, right? And so then looking at sort of small little things you can change, like for example, drinking wine at the end of the evening, right? So people do this because they want to relax, but there are better ways to do this. You can learn how to do other kinds of things. You can do other, you can reach out to friends and family. You can have a phone call with them and to relax. And then there's even things like small little supplements that I sometimes use with people just to start getting them to feel of, okay, well, maybe I can do this in a more healthy way, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of having 2 glasses of wine when my kids go to bed, maybe I can just take some L-theanine or like a little bit of kava or just like something small, or, even something like a little bit of a cannabinoid like CBD or CBG or something like that's non-psychoactive. And just like, how does this kind of help me relax, as opposed to like the alcohol, which is going to mess up my sleep. And then I'm going to feel worse in the morning when I wake up and I have to take care of my kids again, right? So what I try to do is, work really just kind of understand people's day-to-day operations. Like, what are they doing on a day-to-day basis? And one of the ways I work as a clinician is like, I want you to do a food activity log for me for at least a couple weeks to see what you're doing, right? And then if you can make some simple choices, like say you're having soda, instead of, maybe water, or right, maybe like you can get like some electrolytes or something like that. That could be a huge shift just like that. So especially in young people, especially in somebody in their 20s and early 30s, it's much easier to make very small changes to see really big benefits right away. And so this is where things like you mentioned methylene blue, that can come in sometimes. It's like small little things where you can really start seeing a benefit, because sometimes it's not, the psychology is difficult. If you're sleep deprived, if you're working all the time and you're managing money, and I totally understand. But I will say that even in those cases, there usually are some small little things that you can do to make a big difference. But that really does require you to start sort of doing a biopsy of your life, in the sense of like having a way to understand what you're actually doing. Because most people, like I think they've mentioned in statistics, like 90% of the things that we do every day are habits, the things that we do every day without really thinking about them. So taking an inventory of those and then deciding where you can really make changes. And then also know that there's a lot of help out there too. It's like, you don't have to do this alone,
Yeah, I love that. And there's actually so many things you can do for free as well, of even like going for a walk outside, water, like those types of things. Meditation can even be free. Seeing the sunrise, seeing the sunset, those things can make a big difference versus scrolling on social media, which gives you like the fake dopamine hit, but it's so addictive.
Right. And the beautiful parents that are doing these beautiful things with their children, and it's like, oh, I can't do that. But yeah, like if you can rebuild some of your habits into healthier ones, there are some that are called cornerstone habits. It was a term that's been defined for a while, which is a cornerstone habit is one of them is exercise, actually. So if you start doing more exercise, you actually start wanting to do other things that are healthier for yourself. So for example, if you start exercising, maybe to start walking around the block, seeing the sunset in the morning, you're like, you know what, maybe instead of having that alcohol in the evenings, maybe what I'll do is, if I wake up feeling better and get my kids to daycare or whatever, and I can take a walk for 5 minutes before I start work, or I can take that break during my work and do 30 minutes of, walking exercise, or even sitting and resting and taking a nap. Right. And that's like, I'm a huge fan of naps. I think one thing I always tell new parents as well is like, especially when they're really young, the babies, is nap when your kid is napping, if you can. It doesn't matter what time of day, because just get as much sleep as you can. So I'm a big fan of naps if those can be involved too. But resetting your habits and finding a couple cornerstone ones that can really make a difference. And then, sometimes it's helpful to have the experience of what it would feel like to feel more calm and relaxed. And that could be something, sometimes it could be supplementation, or taking a small vacation if you can, or something, just like, oh, this is what it felt like to be relaxed. And how can I get back there on a regular basis,
This episode is brought to you by Optimize Her, my women's biohacking retreat in Costa Rica, happening March 2nd to 7th, 2026. I am so excited, guys. This isn't just another yoga retreat. It's a 5-night, 6-day, science-backed health optimization woven into feminine restoration, designed specifically for women's bodies. We'll dive into functional medicine and longevity tools, experience healing sessions like sound baths and cacao ceremonies, and recalibrate with daily movement, spa rituals, and farm-to-table meals that support hormones, gut health, and vitality. It's not about fixing. It's about clearing the noise so you can actually tune into your body again. If you're ready for deep restoration and transformation, you can explore all the details in the show notes, and I would absolutely love to see you in Costa Rica. Yeah, I love that. What's your stance on alcohol with energy, mitochondria, parenting, everything we're talking about? And do you drink alcohol?
I haven't had a drink, and this is not because I was an alcoholic or anything. I didn't do well with alcohol my whole life. Probably about the last 10 years or so, I would say. Maybe once at one of those Japanese restaurants where they squirt things in your mouth, like the Benihana type of places or something. But in between, I haven't had any. And I think the thing about alcohol is that, I don't think there's much of a reason. I understand why people drink alcohol for sure, because what it does is it works on what's called the GABA system in the brain. And GABA is our primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. So it relaxes the firing of the brain. It's like the brakes of the brain. And many of us are walking around with GABA deficiency. GABA when it's deficient, you have increased risk of anxiety, of insomnia, of depression, because it increases the amount of thoughts and sort of sensory overload that you can have if you don't have enough to calm things down. And like, actually interesting statistic that on average, we have about 70,000 thoughts per day. And I think a new mom or a new parent probably has 120,000 thoughts per day. That's what's been shown for anxiety, depression, insomnia, and things like that. And a lot of this is because your stress system is so hyperactive, right? Because when you're a parent, you're not getting enough sleep, you're not eating as well, all those things, the pressures, et cetera. And this obviously is not just related to a new parent. It's going to be happening, throughout, your life for very many reasons as a parent and otherwise. But when that happens, you deplete that GABA system. And then the other neurotransmitter that's always trying to be in balance with it is something called glutamate. And glutamate is our primary excitatory neurotransmitter. And actually glutamate actually converts to GABA in the brain. And if you have not enough GABA around, you have too much glutamate. The most common acute example of this is you go to a Chinese restaurant and have MSG in your food, monosodium glutamate, and you get headaches, irritability, you feel good, you don't sleep. That's that glutamate toxicity. And so what can happen is that if you have too much of that glutamate, that's the kind of symptoms that you have. Now, what alcohol does is give you more, is the amount of GABA that binds to its receptor. So you feel good, you feel more relaxed, you feel calmer. But the problem with it is that, GABA can get depleted more if you drink alcohol. And also that alcohol binds so tightly to the receptor that it increases your risk of, tolerance, dependence, and withdrawal over time if you drink more and more alcohol over time. And we also know that if you drink and many people that have like a ring or like some other way they track, they'll know that their sleep is going to be really crappy overall. And we don't really know if there's a safe amount of alcohol to drink compared. So they've done some of these new studies and looking at like any amount of alcohol. I'm not a 1 or 0 kind of person here. Like, I'm not like, I think a little bit of alcohol is probably fine. My wife drinks wine sometimes. I think that's totally okay, but it shouldn't be something that you're using specifically to relax because of X or Y or Z. If you're having it in a social gathering, like that's how it's been used in like, the blue zones, if you believe those or not, right? But like that's how alcohol has mostly been, I think, a longevity compound is in the right. setting of relationships and meals and, those kinds of things, not like my kids are sleeping, thank God, where's the alcohol, right? And so, because that's, a relationship with it that's like likely unhealthy. I'm one of those people where if you're going to drink it, drink clean stuff, drink organic stuff. Try not to use it to get drunk. I was never somebody that could, drink and wake up the next day and feel good. I did have friends like that. I don't know about you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a time in my life when I could do that. I used to party like 4 times a week, in my early 20s when I was a teenager. I've been sober for 2 years now. And very same vibes of, it was never an addiction or I had a problem with it.
Sure.
But there was this element of like, oh, it's Friday night, I have to drink. Like everyone drinks on Friday night. I got through the work week. And so it was something that and when I got my Aura ring, exactly like you said, I got my Aura ring 6 years ago. And I started seeing the data of when I would drink on my heart, on my HRV and my resting heart rate. And I was like, I don't think I can do this. Like, this doesn't make sense. Like, why? It was terrible. My HRV would plummet to like 40s or 50s. And I was 26 years old.
Yeah, that's super common, right? But people don't realize it. But once you start looking at the data, now there are some good signs though, Brittany. I don't know if you've seen this, but the amount of alcohol that's being intaked by younger people has actually gone down dramatically. And there's a huge amount more interest in mocktails and not using alcohol as sort of the escape. And I did the same thing when I was, your ages, with those ages too that you described. When I was a teenager, what did you do? You went to go drink, right? You found a place in the woods where nobody could find you and you had a bonfire. And like, this is what I grew up doing in New York and when as a kid. And then, in college, you go out and you go drink. That's what it is. But what's interesting is things have been changing, which I think is good. Not as actually the amount of alcohol that's being drank by younger people is going down, which I think is a good thing. Now, there's much more interest in, things like psychedelics and mushrooms and psilocybin and things like that, which I think is probably more beneficial, to be honest, if it's used more intentionally, because it doesn't have the same potential negative side effects over time. But in the end, what we're all really trying to do here, Brittany, is regulate our nervous system, right? We're trying to regulate the capacity for us to be on when we want to be on and to turn off. And I call this the dynamic oscillation of our nervous system, which means that our nervous system is always trying to go from fight or flight sometimes when you have to do something that you need to do, and also to what's called parasympathetic, your rest, digest, relaxation. But unfortunately, most of us are living in that sympathetic, that fight or flight more of the time. And then when you do that, and you can't rest, digest, detox, you can't actually, even if you're looking to build muscle at the gym and you don't have that rest, digest, you can't actually build muscle either. And so that's when we do a lot of our healing and our detoxification. And so that's why, with a lot of my patients, and I fall into this category too, like I really have to be acknowledging that that's my default, and many of my patients and people that I know, default is to be on all the time. I mean, I grew up in New York with the city that never sleeps. I didn't grow up in the city, but that kind of culture was around me all the time. And so what I often emphasize to people is, well, how can we learn how to calm down our nervous system? Because, the thing about it is that everybody's had the dream, or actually even the experience where they're about to give a speech or they're about to present and they forget all their lines, right? And they forget what they're going to say because their mind is so fight or flight dominant that you're not getting enough blood flow to the front of your brain, actually. And that's why you just go blank, right? But as soon as you can calm down your nervous system just a little bit, that's when you can actually start performing better, because your nervous system is like relaxed and like you kind of like drop into flow, right? And that's what the GABA system can help you do if you can leverage it appropriately, right? Not with alcohol, I don't feel, but if you can understand how you talked about meditation, that's great if you can learn that. Meditation, by the way, for those who are listening, doesn't mean you don't have any thoughts. That doesn't exist for the most part, but it just means that you can have some space from your thoughts and observe them and see them kind of floating around and realizing that, again, you have 70,000 thoughts per day on average. Please don't believe everything you think, right? Because it's all craziness that's going on in that brain of yours, all of our brains, right?
Yeah.
And so the idea is to kind of calm down the nervous system and let your mind relax more. And then meditation can help, breath work can help. Not Wim Hof per se, guys and gals. It's more like the breath work that can help relax you. So like extending your exhales, but even exercise can do this too. Exercise balances your nervous system and actually releases something called BDNF, or brain derived neurotrophic factor, which actually stimulates the GABA system as well. So you have multiple things you can do. And then your diet can be very helpful here, that you have sort of precursors to making GABA in the system. And then you can use supplementation, but the main thing is that you don't want to use GABA supplements typically, because GABA itself, there's a lot of GABA supplements out there. GABA is too big to get into the brain typically as a molecule. So if it does work for you, if your GABA supplement works for you, it could mean that you have what's called a leaky brain. Now that sounds scary, but what that means is that blood-brain barrier is not doing what it's supposed to do for keeping things out. And that often means you have a leaky gut as well. So you fix the gut, you typically fix the brain. And so I use other modulators of the GABA system to help people feel that, we were talking about earlier, like, I don't remember what it is, how it felt to feel calm, that kind of thing. You can give them that experience. I talked about kava, CBD. CBG is another good cannabinoid that doesn't cause psychoactivity. I like something called, for sleep as well, because sleep can be really difficult, I like something called Agarin, which is a supplement that comes from the Amanita mushroom, the Amanita muscaria, which it's a psychedelic mushroom, but this particular compound's not psychedelic. And it helps with getting on that GABA receptor and supporting it. So multiple different things, but I think in the end, the goal really is to, lifestyle, of course, diet, supplementation. But oftentimes with a lot of people that I see, you start with the supplements first because they don't have they don't think they have the capacity to do some of the other stuff right away because it takes too much time, But then once they start feeling a little bit better, it's like, oh, then maybe I can do this in other ways. And then, of course, you have to support those mitochondria in the cells that are helping you make energy, because a lot of people and parents are probably the biggest group, the youngest group. So the biggest group that's young that has issues with, energy, right? Because they feel like they're tired all the time. So you really have to support those mitochondria too.
Yeah, I love that. And I see a lot of that in the dialogue that I have with women as well. And I'm curious, we're obviously talking a lot about parents, but I wonder if you have a lot of type A moms or type A dads maybe that come to you that are actually maybe they're not tired. Like, I just think when I'm in this mode of like, go, 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 I'm doing so much and I'm so successful in every area of my life. But, maybe if you ran a lab panel, it would actually not be super great. And I recently did a podcast episode on this about cancer. And this friend of mine, she runs a couple clinics in Canada. She said her number one patient that comes in now is a woman in her 40s who's super healthy and done all the things right, but is like type A and just like has not really sat and done nothing for a long period of time. And they come in and they're like, but I'm the one who does yoga and drinks a green juice. How do I have cancer? And so she's seeing this younger and younger now. So I'm curious, like, how does that show up maybe in your practice? If you're a woman juggling work, motherhood, and trying to stay healthy, you know how easy it is to feel burnt out. The fatigue, the bloating, the restless nights, the hormonal ups and downs that make everything harder. And that's exactly why I love Bioptimizers, supplements that actually work with your biology. Their magnesium breakthrough is one of my daily must-haves. It combines all 7 forms of magnesium to calm your nervous system, support hormonal balance, improve sleep, and help you finally feel grounded again. Doesn't that sound nice? And if you're tired of feeling puffy or bloated after meals, their mass enzymes and P3OM probiotics are game changers. They help you digest food properly, reduce inflammation, and keep your gut and mood balanced. Every formula is science-backed, third-party tested, and designed for real results, not just quick fixes. You can try them at bioptimizers.com/biohackingbrittany and use my code biohackingbrittany for 15% off your order. That's bioptimizers.com/biohackingbrittany, because when your gut, hormones, and nervous system are supported, everything else feels easier.
Well, it's a really great way to kind of describe what's happening to people just overall, which is the toxic load that all of us are subject to. I think the biggest thing out there is that women tend to be more resilient to toxicity overall until they reach about the perimenopausal timeframe when their hormones start changing. Men are more subject to it younger because estrogen and progesterone are actually protective. And so you have this major shift in women, especially during the sort of the perimenopausal timeframe where their hormones start changing, and then inflammation starts going up pretty dramatically. And as a result of that hormone shift, the sleep gets much worse. Like progesterone is actually very, very important for sleep, for example. Your capacity to have an optimized microbiome actually changes significantly as well. And the way you actually process estrogen and progesterone. And I have a colleague of mine that actually just presented at a conference that we just ran on something called the estrobolome. Actually, it's called how estrogen is being metabolized in the liver and the gut, and how this changes as you get older. And so I think what you're seeing here is a couple things, Brittany. I think you're seeing this sort of, the major thing that I see is toxic load overall. And you think about this as sort of all the things that we're subject to: the food, the water, the toxins that are in our cosmetics and lotions and detergents and things that we put in our mouth, and everything else that you could think of, anything from the fluoride to to the tampons, to everything, right? Is like, it's just like a huge amount. And so some people just don't have a huge amount of capacity to actually subject themselves to this toxic load when things start going south. And then you add on top of that a type A person that is in that fight or flight sympathetic mode for years, right? They don't even know what it feels. So they never have time to detoxify. They never have time to let their body relax and detoxify. So detoxification, is so important. Obviously, sleep is probably our biggest time to detoxify. So if you're shortchanging your sleep, you're not getting enough detoxification. And, the average American, at least, I'm not sure about Canada, but I bet it's close, is that sleeps about 6.5 hours a night. And I promise you're probably not within the 2% of the population that has a genetic polymorphism that allows them to sleep for less than 5 or 6 hours a night and have enough sleep. So most of us need at least 7. And then actually women need about 20 or 30 minutes more sleep compared to men on average until they reach, through and when they're in menopause, it's about the same. But, if you're not on HRT and things like that. But, so what you have here is that people are just in this sympathetic overload all the time. So they can't detox, they can't digest, and as a result of that, they are also in combination with the toxic load that they're getting, just everybody is. And then some genetic predispositions and things like that. You have this sort of, perfect storm. And, there's other controversial things that may be leading, or thoughts about, that are also, potentially contributing. Some people think vaccinations might be part of it, but some people think that it might be like certain chemicals in the environment, and like certain dyes and things like that. But I think in the end, Brittany, it's more of just sort of this I have a friend, her name's Dr. Jill Carnahan, and she likes to talk about this toxic bucket. And then, you get to, and everybody's bucket's a different size. And I think that's a good way to describe it. And then some people have a small one, some people have a large one. Like you could think of your centenarians, like, that live to 100 and smoking cigars the whole time, right? These people, fantastic toxic buckets, like, the size of, my house or something like that, right? And then you have somebody else that starts getting significant issues when they're 8 or 9, right? And then that's, when they have this much smaller, right? And then you also have to remember there's like the psychosocial emotional aspect of things that is huge. If you're in a toxic relationship, if you have an ignoring partner at night and you can't get good rest, if you don't have a good, if you've had trauma in your past as well, where things have, if you, unfortunately, like we know that 1 in 3 women, at least in the United States, has had some sort of abuse in their life. It's a huge amount of people. So it's like all these things kind of build up over time. And so when you're looking at, on my side, yes, you want to look at labs, and I do like a full array of testing and use something called metabolomics, which is the study of how the cells are working in real time, looking at vitamins, minerals, nutrients, like mitochondrial function, gut health, neurotransmitters, hormones. Looking all of those things is extremely important. Even if you feel healthy, in quotes, is just because you feel good doesn't mean you're well. It just means you're not sick right now. So you have to remember that, right? So like just because we can compensate for a long time, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. I promise you. And then one day you'll be like, well, what just happened to me? How could this happen? And it didn't just happen overnight. When I herniated a disc in my back maybe 5 years ago, and I was like, for a while, like, woe is me. How did this happen? But as I thought about it, like I had zero core strength. I didn't even know what core strength was until I injured the back. And I realized that I'd been, picking up kids for 10 years, right? And doing all, and not really thinking about that. And one day I went to go touch my toes during the pandemic and, snap my fingers. And then I couldn't feel my right leg for a couple of days. Right. And then, so in the immediacy of that, you're like, oh, how could this happen? Right. But 10 years of that probably until it actually did. Right. So we have to be thinking proactively. And that's hard for humans because we're not evolutionarily wired to think long term. We're evolutionarily wired to think about how we can survive today and tomorrow, and our kids can survive today and tomorrow. We're not wired to think about 6 months, a year, 10 years from now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's why I think longevity is really taking off right now. Like I'm enrolling, I know you know what A4M is.
Of course.
Yeah.
Lectures, like given multiple lectures at A4.
Oh, nice. Okay. So I'm enrolling in their board certification of longevity medicine. And I think it's interesting to start to actually look at this and say, okay, what can I do now in my 30s or whatever decade that we're in so that when I'm in my 60s, I don't have that moment of like, whoa, where did this come from? How did this happen? Whether it's a cancer diagnosis or like what you went through as well. And so for those people listening who are, let's say, those types of age ranges and are like, oh, I'm actually interested in longevity. Like, what can we do today that will make a big impact above and beyond maybe these cornerstone habits that we've talked about already?
Yeah. So I'm wearing a shirt. It's called Biont Hacking, BIONT, and hacking. And so you've heard of biohacking before, right? Yeah. And so what I think about here is something called the holobiont. It's HOLOBIONT. And it's what that really refers to is that you're looking at yourself in the mirror, you're made up of much more non-human cells than you are human cells. You have bacteria, fungus, and virus living in you at all times. You're subject to your food, your water, your environment, your stress. And so what you want to do is optimize this holoorganism that is you. And that is this holobiont concept. And what you can do in that respect is take the shift away from, yes, you're a person that lives in a population and an ecosystem and that's very important, right? But you're not, you've heard of epidemiology before. They talk about risks in populations and then, giving things to people, because if we give one person something, then if this is going to help, it'll take about 95 people or something to get an improvement if you give people these things. Which the better way to describe that is that when we give like population types of interventions, it's the hope that if you do it to a certain level, that you'll help a certain percentage of that population. But that particular intervention is not directly supposed to be helping you. It's just helping the population. But that's good, but that's not really what longevity and health span is all about, really. It's about looking at that quote unquote biohacking perspective, which is that N equals 1 perspective. But my issue with biohacking in general is that sometimes people look for the extra supplement, the extra technology, and they forget about doing the foundational things first. Because if you don't have optimized levels of vitamins, minerals, nutrients, if your gut is not healthy, if you're not working on your neurotransmitters, your hormones, your stress, and understanding how this is all working on the cellular level, cellular medicine is the game. And what holobiontology is, and biont hacking is looking at that holobiont perspective. And then looking at all of what is you on multiple levels, and then looking at how you can optimize that over time, right? It's not looking at it from a disease perspective. It's actually looking at from a health perspective. How can you keep yourself healthy? When are we most healthy? Typically when we're 21 to 30 years of age. And so we have actually a nonprofit that's called Health Optimization Medicine and Practice, or Home Hope for short, that educates practitioners. And I'm educated in this as well in my own practice on how to look at these optimized levels. So not looking at longevity per se, but looking at health span as the main focus, optimizing you from when you were 21 to 30 years of age. And that's when we're most optimized. But everybody remembers, you could drink all night and wake up the next day, it sounds like, Brittany, and be fine, right? And be pretty resilient overall. This is when we're most optimized to have children, to raise children, to fight in wars, to recover from wars, those kinds of things. And so what I do in clinical practice is look at that holobiont perspective for my patients and clients. And that's what I recommend people think about too, is that don't just look at that population-based data and say, well, my doctor says I should take this because it's going to prevent the risk of X. And that may be true, but in addition to that, what is going on with your personal physiology, biology, psychology? And that's really where the next stage of health really is. And that's how we can really focus on that framework here, which is let's keep ourselves as healthy for as long as we can until we die. Whether we are going to live to 150, I'm not convinced of that quite at this moment. I think that the goal really for most of us would be to live as healthy as we can for as long as we can. So that's health span.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree with that. People have been wording it and phrasing it in so many different ways, like a healthier second half of life, like all these different things. And I think that's amazing. What I find right now, if I were to talk to my friends who are, let's say, like not in the health and wellness space, but maybe go to Pilates, or maybe they're runners or whatever, it's kind of hard to get them to care, to be honest. It's kind of hard to have this conversation of like, hey, have you thought about how healthy you're going to be when you retire one day and have grandkids? They're like, no. It's almost like me thinking right now as well of oh, I'm going to retire one day. Okay, how much money do I need? Oh, that's so far from now. Let me just not even worry about it, right? So how do you get people in their 20s? I started caring because I had health issues. I was forced to care. And then I had so much passion that grew from it. And then I built a career on it. Great. But what about all those people who are just ignoring their health issues and they're chasing a career in New York City? They're doing all the things. How do you say, hey, what about the second half of your life?
Yeah, it's a great question. And what I mentioned before is really true here, which is we're not evolutionarily programmed to think that we're ever going to die or ever feel worse than we feel now. And so we don't like to think about death, even though if you're a meditator, you think you should be thinking about death regularly, because it actually makes you actually live, right? And actually feel fully in your present moment, that you may die at any moment. But that's not how we're wired. And so what I found over the years, Brittany, is that it's not my responsibility for somebody to take care of their own health. But what I do try to do is give them, breadcrumbs along the way as best I can. And so when you can find some of these cornerstone things, like we were talking about earlier, so if they're exercising, they typically don't want to drink and feel like shit, so they wake up in the morning and can't exercise, right? So, maybe if you just stop drinking maybe 4 hours before you went to bed, you'd feel better in the morning. You could meet me at Pilates and we'd have a great time. What I typically do, because I've done this for so many years, and, I have kids too. So I have to always think about how you can give them a little bit of information. And the movie Inception, right? The movie Inception with Leonardo DiCaprio is a great example here, which is that it has to come from them. It can't come from me. And so it has to be something that's motivating them. And as you mentioned, oftentimes it is when they don't feel well, when something's not going well. I remember, my brother, for example, who's a couple of years younger than me, he always feels great. He says but then when he feels sick, he feels terrible, right? And he's lucky. But when he felt terrible, I'm like, look, you could have done X, Y, Z, and this could have been, or I can give you something now to help you to make you feel better. And he's all for it. And he's like, oh, well, maybe next time I know I'm going to do this so that that this doesn't happen, right? So we tend to be reactive. It's just the way that we're evolved. to be proactive, what I found is to just be supportive as a human that's in relationship with that human, right? And supportive in like, if something goes wrong or they feel a little bit of something, like, and just give them a little bit of something. Well, maybe if you want to try this with me next time, or you want to try this, like, this is just what I do with my kids, right? Like my daughter, who's now 14, doesn't like to go to bed on time anymore. And she likes to have her phone in the room and things like this, right? And so we have these conversations about getting a little bit of extra sleep can go a long way. And if she does it, she does feel a difference. She may not listen to me because she's still 14, but she knows what it feels like to get a little bit of extra sleep or eat a little bit better, right? And food is a big part of it, especially for kids, because it's really hard as parents now to regulate the types of food that your kids are eating. And so, they go to birthday parties and they, et cetera. Like it's difficult, and you don't want to be that sort of food curmudgeon either, because you don't want to give them a sort of a relationship with food that's also detrimental. So it's one that I have a lot with my kids. I say, look, you can, if you have what you're going to have, that's fine, but just understand that over time this can be a problem. Or think about how you felt after, a couple hours after that, sugar bomb that you had, right? And we can talk about it. So it's just small little things for people can go a long way. But even doctors, Brittany, most of the doctors that you'll meet that are in the integrative world have gotten there because of their own health challenges or the health challenges of their families. I was talking to a doctor just a couple of days ago who had a kid. I think he's a gastroenterologist, and he's an internal medicine doc, and his son had these severe Tourette's syndrome. So like severe tics as a child, like when he was 2 or 3 years of age, and everybody wanted to put him on like anxiety medications like Valium and Xanax, which are super strong. And he didn't want to do that, but he found out after doing an elimination diet that his son was sensitive to glyphosate. And once he took out glyphosate, his tics went away. The gastroenterologist wanted to put in, his tics were so bad, they were going to put a feeding tube in to help him eat because he couldn't eat. And then now he's like perfectly fine child with no issues. And so understanding that, there are ways to help people and help your family. He's like, well, I don't want to be just a regular doctor anymore. Like I want to help people in a much more holistic way. And so he was at one of our conferences, our nonprofits conference just this past weekend, like learning health optimization medicine, because that's what he wants to do. So you'll find that most doctors in this world, I'm a little bit different. I grew up the son of a chiropractor. So I always knew that there was another way.
Yeah.
And so as a result, that I've had a practice that sort of mirrored my upbringing in various ways, but in various evolutions that have been my own. But you'll find a lot of doctors have gone through their own stories, and that's how they've come. So doctors are no different, right? Doctors think everything's fine until everything's not fine, right? And so we're all, I think, on this path together, and so I think it's important that we can support each other, but know that it has to come from the person in the end, and we can't force them to do anything.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, like you can model the behavior, especially with kids, which is like already what I see with my son now is like, yeah. And even with my husband, who like I'm healthier than he is, if I preach at him and I'm like, do all these things, it's like there's so much ego there, doesn't care. But if I just model it over time, it has a much bigger impact. Same with my family as well. And so that's been a lesson I've had to learn.
Of course. I think it's an important lesson, modeling people, and kids especially, they don't do what you say, they do what you do. So always remember that.
Yeah, exactly. I want to shift gears to methylene blue and mitochondria. So in terms of like, even on this topic of energy and parents, how can methylene blue be something that maybe we turn to when we need support?
Yeah, it's kind of a crazy compound. I know it makes everything blue, and people have probably seen it on the socials over the last year or so. It's been around a long time. The actual compound itself has been around for over 150 years. It's had multiple evolutions. It's a fantastic antimicrobial, actually, and at higher doses. It's great for viral infections. It's great for fungal and bacterial. It was used for urinary tract infections at higher doses for long periods of time. And I still use it that way now, actually, in my clinical practice, because it's really no resistance patterns like other antibiotics and things like that. But you have to use it with clinicians at those kinds of doses. But the cool thing is like low doses around 4, 8, 25 milligrams or about those doses is fantastic for the mitochondria in your body. And the thing about it is that 94% of US adults have some element of mitochondrial dysfunction, which is they can't either make energy well, or they can't actually detox from the energy that they make. Meaning that when we make energy, which is ATP in our cells, we also make what are called quote unquote waste products of energy, which are reactive oxygen species, and you have to have antioxidants in the body to help manage those. And if you're antioxidant deficient, if you have gut inflammation, brain inflammation, you're going to be deficient in antioxidants. And so what methylene blue can come in and do is support all aspects of mitochondrial function, both the energy side and the detox side. And it can do it very quickly, which is what I like in clinical practice, where taking somebody's diet and changing it, or changing lifestyle, or working on stress, optimizing vitamins and minerals can take a while. It can take 3 or 6 months or longer, depending on the person. So I start methylene blue very often, very early in my optimization strategies with my patients, because it can really help support that mitochondria as you're working very hard, hopefully to do other things over time to support mitochondria. But the thing about mitochondrial dysfunction is that there's multiple different reasons for it. The main reason is actually insulin resistance. So if you have high blood sugars, you're going to have mitochondrial dysfunction. If you have stress, and we talked about all the reasons why you might have stress, that's going to cause mitochondrial dysfunction. Infections, toxins in our environment, and medications can even do it too. Birth control pills have some mitochondrial dysfunction associated. Some diabetic medications, proton pump inhibitors, reflux medications do it. And then we have the most mitochondria per cell, actually, Brittany, in your eggs. As women, sperm are not far behind, and then the brain is right after that. And so most people will present with cognitive issues when they have mitochondrial dysfunction. And then infertility, as we know, is rising dramatically. And so where methylene blue comes in here is that I know it's strange, it's blue, it does make your urine blue as well, because it concentrates in the urine, but using it in very small doses can really have a really great jump start to the mitochondria. And so I use it a lot in all ages, actually, that need more energy, because everybody, like, the number 1 and 2 complaints that we get as clinicians, I've talked to many, are I don't have enough energy and I don't know how to calm down. Right. And so, and if you just work on the energy side without the calming down side, you can have a problem. If you just work on the calming down side without the energy side, you can also have a problem too, because they're so interrelated. Right. And so where methylene blue comes in is like, when you get more energy in the system, actually the system can actually sometimes calm down more, because it doesn't have to be on overdrive trying to make energy when it doesn't have the capacity or detox from the energy that you make. And so you have this like methylene blue that comes in, and what's cool about it is that it can do both. It can help you make more energy and help make more detox capacity, because there are very few things out there that do both. Most things will help you make more energy, things like caffeine, or if you're into nicotine these days, I've been playing with a little bit of low dose nicotine, which is super cool. I got some patches to try, which I haven't tried yet. They're in my cabinet back there. But the idea is that nicotine and caffeine are great to help you stimulate the body to make more energy, but they don't help on the detox side. So if that's why you have your caffeine, you crash, have your nicotine, you crash, that's because you don't have enough detox capacity. And
Right.
so you can use methylene blue regularly if you need it, especially in the beginning when you're needing more support, if you have more chronic issues. And then hopefully over time, you can kind of wean it down. Or if you're more well optimized, you can use it as a way to kind of push the endurance side. And it's because it's really great as a way to support the way you can make energy more effectively, even if there's low oxygen around. And so airplanes, travel, like methylene blue for travel is fantastic, because when you're on an airplane, you're at low oxygen levels because you're pressurized in the cabin to about 8,000 feet. So living in Colorado, that's not as big a deal for me, but most people live at sea level, which is about 21% oxygen. And on a plane, you're about 16 to 18% oxygen. And so that's a pretty significant stress. And one of the main reasons why you have jet lag symptoms when you get to your location. So a little bit of methylene blue can go a long way, helping support mitochondrial function. So you can use it sort of across the spectrum of health. And then it really just depends on, where you are in that spectrum, how often you might need it, and what kind of dosing you might require.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, I got some, when did I get some? A few years ago. And then I don't even think I tried it, because then I got pregnant, and then I was like, well, I don't know. I'm not going to touch this while I'm pregnant and breastfeeding. I just kind of left it. But I'm curious about, like, I talked about this on my show a while ago, in terms of like mitochondria. Why can we not measure how many mitochondria we have? I know it's like 100,000 in one cell in the ovaries is like what they say, but I want to know how many I have. Like, why are we not there yet with the science?
So it's a very interesting question you raised, because there's a couple of different things. Like, you can look under a microscope and take a real tissue biopsy of somebody and find out how many mitochondria they have per cell in that particular cell that you check. The most common that they do is called a muscle biopsy. It's a punch biopsy. They'll take some muscle, they'll look it under a microscope, and they can actually see your mitochondria in real time. But that's not practical for most people, right? there are ways of looking at ovarian aging, which is called, and you can look at a lab called anti-Müllerian hormone, or AMA, anti-Müllerian antibody. And so AMA, and so that's a sign of mitochondrial dysfunction or function in eggs itself. In the brain, it's very difficult to do this, but you can actually get a sense of it from the vascularization. So how much, as we get older, our blood vascularization goes down and the amount of brain tissue we have goes down, which means it's correspondingly lower. But right now, there's a couple new tests that have come out over the last several years that purport to measure mitochondrial function. But there's a lot of controversy around how reliable they are. The way I do it in clinical practice is I look at what's called organic acid testing, or O testing, which looks at all the various steps along the way, or intermediate molecules that are along the way to helping you make energy and helping you detox from energy that you make. And when you look at those, you can get a relatively good understanding of mitochondrial function from looking at that. You can understand all the vitamins, minerals, and nutrients that are required to making energy, the antioxidants that are required, all the intermediates. So this is what I do in clinical practice. And then, really what you can see is that, you objectively can measure data over time and see how things change. And subjectively, you can work with people and see how they physically feel better doing various kinds of things, right? So as we mentioned, the brain is a big place where you have tons of mitochondria. And so as soon as you start supporting them better, your brain fog should get better, your attention should get better, your mental health overall. We know that a lot of things like depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, even like severe mental health disorders have a significant aspect of mitochondrial dysfunction. And this is why the ketogenic diet, for example, in some of these conditions has been proved actually significantly successful, because we know that ketones, or the byproduct of digesting fat, are much cleaner burning fuel for our brain than glucose. And so you can see when you do more cleaner energy, you can see their brains work better. And this is what I see with using something like methylene blue too, is that you can see subjectively their brain function gets better, their cognition gets better, their anxiety and depressive kinds of symptoms can improve because you're enhancing the capacity of the brain to make energy. And if the brain is under stress, it's going to manifest in different ways for different people, depending on various other factors. I had another practitioner a couple of weeks ago. He's I started taking methylene blue and all my anxiousness went away. And I was like, well, that's not exactly what I would think for most people, because most people have more energy and more, they have more focus, but his manifestation of an energy deficit in his brain was anxiety. And so that's very interesting, right? So you'll see this sometimes, and everybody's going to be a little bit different depending on, what's going on with their own holoorganism, as we were describing before.
I love that. I'm going to put this out there. Someone needs to make an at-home mitochondria test. And I want it to measure mitochondria in every organ of my body. And I want it to be an app on my phone that says, your kidneys are this and your ovaries are this. It's not what I'm going to develop, but someone do it and send it to me.
I mean, what we have now is these aging clocks that are coming out for each of the organs. I think something similar to that will come out for mitochondrial function eventually.
Yes.
I think that we're getting there. I think within the next 5 years, we'll have better testing. We're also going to be looking at various levels of metabolites and other molecules that are coming from the transcription of our DNA into various things like proteins and transcriptomes, like transcriptomes, the proteome, et cetera, the genome, of course, and then then the metabolome and things like. So we're going to get more of this data over time and being able to understand, with big data, with LLMs and things like that, to understand how better to optimize in your personal holobiont, as I was describing. But we're not quite there. But there are some, as I mentioned, organic acid testing is a great way to give you a relatively good snapshot of what's happening now and what just happened in the body. And what's cool about the metabolome is that the vitamins, minerals, and nutrients, you're actually looking at the environmental exposures and toxic exposures on that level, along with what's happening in the cells. So you can kind of see everything all together. So that's the level that I typically use for doing things now.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I figured it would be coming. Everything is advancing so quickly. I'm just excited for that to see it.
Me too.
If people want to work with you, connect with you, or just learn more about what you do, where can they do that?
Sure. So my name is Dr. Scott Sherr. You can go to my website. It's drscottsherr.com, DrScottsherr. And there you'll find my clinical practice. I work in this field called health optimization medicine, which is also a nonprofit organization training practitioners. But I have a telemedicine practice from Colorado where I live. And I work with people all over the world, really, in helping optimize on this level. And if you're a practitioner listening, you can check it out at homehope.org. And we have a 7-module certification. The first module is called Metabolomics. And that module is the kind of the foundation of what we do. But there's other things like epigenetics and it's called exosomics, toxins in our environment, and gut health and things like that are all there. So you can check that at homehope.org. And if you're interested in things like methylene blue and also working on that GABA system we talked about before, I have a company called Transcriptions, and it's a company that makes products that enhance both the GABA systems. We have something called TroCalm and TroZ, which are the calm is for relaxation, anxiety relief. You can use it during the day. It has some of the compounds that I mentioned, things like kava and CBD and CBG. Then the other one called TroZ that has that agarin in there, which is that long-acting from the amanita mushroom. These are great and TroZ is great for sleep. It's a comprehensive way. Because if you're not sleeping, if you're not regulating your stress, it's going to be difficult to optimize mitochondrial function. And then we have the methylene blue side of things. We have something called Just Blue, and we have another one called Blue Canatine, which is a combination of methylene blue with caffeine, nicotine, and CBD, which is great for focus and flow. And I love that one. It's kind of like a morning pick-me-up instead of 10 cups of coffee and energy drinks and those kinds of things without crash and things. So you can check it out at transcriptions.com. You can find me on the socials at Dr. Scott Sherr, at transcriptions, at homehope.org, or all those locations. You can find more information as well.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for coming on the show. I will put all of that in the show notes and on my website so everyone can find you easily. This has been great. And yeah, I learned a lot.
Thank you for having me, Brittany.
Thank you for listening to Biohacking with Brittany. I hope today's conversation gave you something to take into your own life, a practice, a perspective, or simply a reminder to trust your body. If you love this episode, please leave a review, share it with someone else who could benefit, and join me over on Instagram at Biohacking Brittany for more. And if you're ready to go deeper, you can explore my retreats, community, favorite tools, all linked for you in the show notes. Until next time, remember, your body already knows.